In the startup world, you're often just one bad month away from total collapse. For Airbnb, that collapse felt like it was right around the corner. But their survival story, their comeback, it came from a place no one, and I mean no one, would have ever expected: a simple box of cereal. This is the wild story of how a completely desperate, kind of bizarre gamble saved what would become a billion-dollar idea.
So before Airbnb was this name you see everywhere, its founders were completely drowning. This number right here, negative $40,000. That's how deep they were in personal credit card debt, not company debt, their own money, just trying to keep the lights on.
And this wasn't just some number on a spreadsheet, It was getting real, and it was getting painful. Brian Chesky, the co-founder, he said they were literally losing weight from the stress. They had so many maxed out credit cards that they had to organize them in binders. Binders, can you imagine? That's a level of desperation that is just, wow.
So let's just set the scene. The year is 2008. The company, which was called Air Bed and Breakfast back then, had a website, and that's about it. They were looking straight into the abyss, just burning through cash, with zero investors on the horizon.
And you have to understand just how badly it was failing. After a year and a half of pouring their lives into this thing, they were getting just 10 to 20 bookings a day. For a company that was supposed to be global, those numbers were an absolute death sentence. The market just wasn't interested.
So, with their backs completely against the wall, every investor door slammed in their face, they had a realization. The airbed part of their business just wasn't working. So in a moment of what I can only describe as pure desperation, they looked at the other half of their name for a lifeline.
And that was it. That was the question that sparked one of the craziest, most legendary pivots in tech history. If people wouldn't sleep in a stranger's home, maybe, just maybe, they'd buy breakfast from them. It sounds completely insane, right? But they had absolutely nothing to lose.
So, to top into the absolute frenzy of the 2008 presidential election, they came up with these: 2 limited edition, politically themed cereals. You had Obama O's, the breakfast of change, and on the other side, Captain McCain's, a maverick in every bite. I mean, it was clever, it was timely, and it was a complete all-or-nothing Hail Mary. But look, having a great idea is one thing. Actually pulling it off with no money, that's a whole different story. This was not some slick, automated marketing campaign. Oh no. This was a story of pure, unglamorous, hands-on hustle. The process was just pure grit. First, they tried the professional route. They pitched Kellogg's, General Mills, and got rejected, flat out. So, undeterred, they convinced a buddy at a print shop to give them 500 boxes in exchange for a cut of the sales. They went to the store, bought the cheapest generic cereal they could find, and then, get this, they sat in their apartment and hand-folded and hot-glued every single box shut.
You can just imagine what's going through their heads, right? Chesky later joked about this moment of deep doubt. He's sitting there with a hot glue gun, probably burning his fingers, and he's thinking, I wonder if Mark Zuckerberg ever had to hot glue breakfast cereal. And the answer was obviously no. It felt like a really, really bad sign, like they were completely off the path to success.
But here's the twist. That unglamorous, totally weird path they were on, it led somewhere incredible. Their strange, handcrafted marketing stunt didn't just work, it became the absolute breakthrough they were praying for. They sold these things as collector's items for $40 a box, and unbelievably, it worked. They made $40,000, exactly enough to pay off every cent of that crippling credit card debt and finally get a little bit of breathing room. Now, the cash was a lifesaver for sure, but it wasn't the real prize. The real prize was the buzz. The story of the cereal boxes got them national press, and most importantly, it landed them an interview with Paul Graham, the head of the legendary startup incubator Y Combinator. So the story goes, the interview was going terribly. They were about to get shown the door, but then one of the founders pulls out a box of Obama O's, and that's when Paul Graham had this total light bulb moment. He realized, wait a second, if these guys can convince people to pay $40 for a box of cheap cereal, then they have the exact kind of hustle and salesmanship to convince people to do something even crazier: sleep in a stranger's home. This whole incredible story, it's not just some quirky anecdote. It actually contains a really powerful, kind of counterintuitive lesson for anyone out there trying to build something from scratch. And that lesson is all about the power of doing things that don't scale. We're talking about the handcrafted, manual, hustle-driven stuff that you do to win your very first customers. It's how you build a brand people actually remember and how you prove to the world that you simply refuse to die.
So the key takeaways here are pretty clear. First, when you have no money, your creativity is your most valuable currency. Second, you have to prove that you're what investors call a cockroach, a company that is so resilient it is almost impossible to kill. And finally, you do the unscalable things like hot gluing cereal boxes to earn the right to one day do the things that do scale.
And that really leaves us with one last question for you to think about. In a world that's obsessed with automation and massive growth, what's the one scrappy, handcrafted, totally unscalable thing you could do for your project or your company right now? Because as Airbnb proved, that one crazy idea, well, it just might be the thing that changes everything.